took it on the proviso that I had the full support of the board, being a non-Aboriginal person running an Aboriginal organisation. So I was very sensitive to those issues and needed to make sure I had full board support when I needed to go out into community and do the work, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. And all right, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of AHI Industry Connect, and I'd like to welcome this week's guest, Andrew Rowe, the CEO of Havelock House. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you.
Andrew, I'd give everyone a bit of some of your background, Andrew, if I may. You've been a CEO and executive leader for more than 15 years. You're good in the strategic area, but you've also got the operational and relationship management skills. You've got extensive experience in leading organisational change with multi-stakeholder environments. We'll probably drill into that a little bit through today's conversation. Havelock House provides low-cost accommodation to people experiencing financial disadvantage and accessible housing for people with a disability. And Andrew will also learn a bit more about Havelock House through today's conversation. So welcome to Industry Connect. Thanks for giving up your time to be here with us today. Andrew, before I jump into the questions, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we collectively meet on today, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We at AHI are a passionate supporter of reconciliation, and what better week to have this conversation being National Reconciliation Week. I want to reach out to all members of our community, our Indigenous members, and want to let them know that we stand together in the hope for true reconciliation. So if you don't know me, my name is Mark Henderson. I'm the CEO of AHI, and I have the pleasure of hosting this show, AHI Industry Connect, and we hear from people from our industry. And Andrew Rowe, again, thank you for being here with us on this beautiful Friday, and you're coming live from the nation's capital.
I am indeed, and it's a beautiful winter's day here in Canberra.
Yeah, no better place in winter. Cold, but
yes.
Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Now, Andrew, as I said to you earlier, I don't want this to be like the 7:30 report, seeing you are coming live from Canberra, but we might have some curly questions for you later. But I thought we might just start with some light, easy questions, if you're up for that.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Now, these are not too difficult. So just to warm up, tell me, texting or talking?
They're both useful, but if it's available, talking is better.
Talking is better, absolutely. In person, absolutely. COVID-19's put a little bit of a stop to that, but I totally agree. Best day of the week?
Saturday.
Saturday.
I tend to quarantine Saturday just for winding down from the week. I try not to do any work on a Saturday, and enjoy the day, have a slow start, good breakfast, enjoy the day with my daughter, and then if there's work to be done, I'll do it on a Sunday. So as far as I possibly can, I've always quarantined Saturday. Yeah,
fantastic. So the true rest day of your week, Saturday. Now, this one, and I'll be really honest with you, this could come back to haunt you, but the nickname your parents called you growing up?
For some reason, and don't ask me why, it was Fred.
Fred?
On occasion. Yeah.
Fantastic.
No idea the source of that, but there you go.
No, I like it. It's original, and it may be used not against you, Andrew, later on, but we might use it later.
I'm not sure if they've told anyone that. So
no, there you go. Well, we're not quite Joe Rogan-esque yet, but there will be some people that see that. Now, tell me, you go for a drive alone. You've had a hard week. Long drive. What's the go-to song in the car for you?
Oh, that's a good one. I'd probably give you, rather than a song, a genre.
Yep.
I like hip hop and old school punk.
Nice.
So if I'm out on riding a mountain bike or a long ride or in the car and I'm on my own, generally that's what I'm listening to.
Nice. So that'll keep you going on those cold winter days out on the bike in Canberra. Absolutely. Now, Canberra's known for its multicultural environment, including multitudes of sports played in the nation's capital. If I had to ask you to rank Australian rules football, rugby, football or soccer, and rugby league, what would you rank as number one sport?
Well, I used to play rugby union, so that would be the one I'd go to see and the one that I have more interest in, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Can we find any of your highlights on YouTube?
No.
No. Okay. Now, last question. Now, this is a curly question, and we ask for full transparency here. But seeing you are in the nation's capital, Australia's first Prime Minister is, if you can end that sentence.
Oh, look, you've shamed me.
No. No. It's a suburb
Deakin?
surrounding.
Deakin?
No, near opposite to Deakin, Capitol Hill, the other side of Capitol Hill.
Barton?
Edmund Barton, yeah. And look, I'll be fully transparent with you, Andrew. The only reason I know that is I worked for the ad agency that created the campaign for the Centenary of Federation. And that was the campaign lead because no one knew who Australia's first Prime Minister was, Edmund Barton. So thank you for that. No shame in not knowing the answer to that. Now, Andrew, let's go to the reason why we're here together today to talk about you and Havelock House, but also talk about professional development, which is really where AHI is focused. I'm just wondering, could you start with maybe a brief summary of your career and perhaps if you want to share what you saw as the high points and perhaps some of the low points in the 15 plus year of the work that you've been doing in leadership?
Well, I've had a fairly eclectic career, and in some ways I feel possibly a bit like a bit of a faker in front of you right now, because this is my first role in the housing industry. Although I've been on boards for probably 4 or 5 years, community housing boards. But I've worked many years ago in the public service, and I found that very unfulfilling and stifling. So I left 20 plus years ago.
Okay.
And as I said, I've had a bit of an eclectic career since then. But in 2006 or thereabouts, I had a particular interest, and I was studying, starting a PhD at that time, which I never completed, in international development. I saw a role for an international development company here in Canberra, who I had heard about and was renowned for their passion and their commitment to the work they did, and was employee owned. And I thought, I'll go for this job, and if I get it, that's the path I'll go down. I was doing something quite different at the time. I ended up getting it, and that was my start in, I guess, an area where my professional endeavours were really targeted towards a social good. I spent the next 15 years or so in increasingly senior roles involved in delivering overseas development assistance. A few years after that time, the company that I started with was acquired and taken over by a big multinational engineering services firm. And I thought, well, a lot of people get spat out of that sort of process, but I'll go along for the ride. It'll be, I think I'll learn a lot, and I did. But there was a big clash of cultures. So the work in the firm that I originally joined, they worked in the health, education, governance, public sector, those sort of areas. The firm that bought it out was engineering. So I guess, the soft versus the hard sciences industries. And they never really understood the nature of the business or the work we did. It's much more relationship based. Whereas engineering is very structured, I suppose, and quite a different risk profile. So the people that did that worked in the areas we did just clashed. There's a clash of cultures, and I ended up managing that area in that multinational firm, and increasingly struggled to be able to run the business how we thought it should be run. And gradually, over the space of about 18 months to 2 years, the business that was taken over went from 30, 35 people down to about 5 or less.
Right.
They were just increasingly
Big change.
dissatisfied, and it didn't work. And that was really something that showed me the importance of culture, organizational culture, and understanding it, and that it's related to the work people do. It relates to the sectors they work with, who they work with, the communities that are important, their stakeholders. So every organization has a culture, and it's really, really important to understand that and integrate that into your leadership and your approach.
Yeah.
So going back to your question, around that time, I thought there's an opportunity here for a firm that had the characteristics of the one that was bought out, around its passion, its commitment, its ethics, but perhaps without some of the strategic business flaws that I saw led to its demise. So I branched out and jumped, and after over 12 months of planning and gradually having conversations with people who I thought were important, I started my own SME working in the same sector, international development, and a few people came along with me. And that was my job for the next 10 years as founder and CEO of that firm. It was applied research, applied social research.
Right.
And that was a hard journey. It was very rewarding. At the end of my time last year, we'd worked in more than 19 countries internationally. We delivered 150 projects, thereabouts, in very difficult environments. So
absolutely.
Social research in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands and right through Southeast Asia and the Pacific.
Yeah.
Some of the low points, very, very difficult business as we were competing against foreign firms and multinational firms to win work on open tender. So there was about a year when increasingly marginal, and weren't sure whether we were going to survive from one month to the next.
Right.
So that was probably, maybe not the low point, but one of the hardest points in my whole professional career, just going in and working to save it. But also, and this is one of the other lessons I learned, that in those times when it's, and this is possibly relevant to the current moment, when things are very hard and you're looking day to day, week to week, and possibly a month out, and that's stealing your focus, you, as a leader, you just can't completely forget the longer term.
Yeah.
So if you, and back to the time when the company was struggling, I was also thinking about, there's a firm in Papua New Guinea that's open to acquisition. So I was thinking, okay, this is going to be a 12-month, 2-year process if we were going to try and acquire a local firm in Guinea. And I'd try and keep that as a focus, right? What do we need to do if we're going to go down this path? And I remember a number of conversations at the board level. They're telling me, look, I don't know if we're going to survive until next month. What are you doing talking about next year? But we made it through, and we went down that path. Yeah. So it's that low point was also a lesson in resilience, in keeping focus on what you need to survive, but also where you're going in the longer term. And that stood me well.
Yeah, and well, let's fast forward to feels like months ago. I think it was months ago when we talked to when the whole country was put into lockdown.
Yep.
When you heard those words lockdown and kind of understood the gravity of the lockdown situation, I mean, how did you respond from a CEO perspective?
We anticipated things pretty early, so we were putting things in place. And my main focus, the team's main focus, was Havelock House here in Canberra. So as a bit of background, Havelock House is 101 rooms, and there's congregate living arrangements. So the units range from 4-bedroom to 8-bedroom, and there's shared bathroom facilities, shared kitchen, shared common rooms. Yeah, so you could say we're one giant incubator or Petri.
Yeah, absolutely,
in the middle of Canberra. Yeah. So that was our focus, and we knew what was likely to come. And before the lockdown, we were looking at our procedures, starting an education awareness campaign with the residents, bringing in equipment, raising awareness around hygiene and cleanliness. So we were doing that for about 3 weeks before the real crisis hit.
Right.
So the main focus for us was to prepare for that, make sure our policies and procedures were rigorous and followed by all the staff, and just do the best we could, I suppose.
Yeah. And what did you, from the people who use your facility at Havelock House, how did they respond? How was, it must have been a challenging message to be hearing for them.
Yeah, it was interesting. Early on, I don't think they really realised or had a full understanding of the potential risk. But as things moved along and as the media was flooded every day, so all we heard about was the pandemic and the number of people getting sick and deaths and testing, we noticed that there was a increase in the number of incidents or manifestations of stress, psychological distress in the residents, and that was becoming harder to manage.
Yeah.
So as the general community was getting stressed, and this is where things were being, the supermarket shelves were bare, and everyone was running around trying to hoard toilet paper and that sort of stuff.
It's crazy time.
Some of our residents were walking to several supermarkets to try and find staples, and they don't have the capacity here to either the money or the space to stockpile food or anything else. So it was really causing a bit of stress. So that was our focus at that time, and in response to that, we were asking the government to help us out with mental health support, or counselling services, or referral, or just interestingly, one of the first responses was a link to Beyond Blue and Lifeline.
Fantastic.
It's not really going to be helpful. If I didn't know they were available, shouldn't really be my role. So we ended up organising our own. We engaged a counsellor to come in, and it's had great results. So people come and talk to counsellors, just get some coping strategies, or just assuage their stress. So that's worked well. Really stressful time. We ran a webinar maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago on homelessness, and really resonated to me that, we're asking people to isolate at home and stay safe, but when we've got people who are homeless, it's a very, very challenging ask. And one of the other things we thought about, well, if we have to ask our residents here in Havelock House to go into isolation or quarantine, they're going to find it tough, and just getting them to do that is almost impossible. So what do they need, and what will encourage them to do that, which will reduce the threat to the broader resident community here, but also outside of Havelock. So we started a meal service. So we partnered with one of the local clubs who his restaurants were no longer operating, and we arranged to have ready-to-eat meals made, and we made those available to our residents and to the broader community, so that if a unit did have to go into quarantine, we would just supply them with all the meals they needed, everything else they needed, so they could just wait that out without too much stress. No,
that's fantastic, and a great use of resources that have become available at this time. Andrew, let's just keen to pick your brains as best we can. We have a lot of emerging leaders in our membership, people with really strong ambition for where they want to take their career, and our role is to really support them in the housing industry to achieve that. That's really our task. When you were early on in your career, can you think back to a time where you took some advice from someone that's made an impact then, or maybe it didn't make an impact, but it resonates with you now in your role as a leader?
There are probably two, one piece of advice and then one incident. So early on, when I joined as an operations manager to the firm I was talking about, the international development firm, I was about 2 weeks into the role, 2 or 3 weeks, very early. And one of the tasks I had to do was negotiate with suppliers and solve problems and all that. And there was one particularly challenging contractor or supplier who was pretty unreasonable and demanding, and had a reputation for that. And I held firm, and I pushed back, and didn't back down, and stuck to her. Didn't resolve it, but then a couple of hours after that conversation, I got called into the managing director's office, and she'd gone straight to the top.
Right.
And so, I'm in trouble now. But John, the managing director, who I've been friends with for 15 plus years now, and he worked with a new firm, and I'm still friends with. He sat down and said, "Okay, tell me what happened." And so I told him, and he said, "Look, if you're not annoying people, if people aren't complaining about you, I'm going to start to think that you're not doing your job." And there was a bit of relief that I was going to be dragged to the coals in my new job. But there was also a lesson that, as a leader, I think you've got to back your staff. Don't assume that what you've been told is the case. Find out, have a conversation, and back them to the hilt. And know that some of them have got a hard job to do, and in some ways you've got to take the risk for them, take the consequences, and give them a buffer to give them that experience. So that was one spring lesson. The other, and reflecting on this earlier today, I have to qualify it, but I worked for a fellow who's also a friend. He came out, he was a Navy captain. He came out and he worked at the firm, and he told me once that you can never pick your dream team. You have to make and work out how to get the best out of the team you have. I said, that's true. So if it's not working, well, you've got to work out as a leader how to do that. What can you change? How can you support? What strategies can you put in place? Because you'll never be able to get the best team you want. You just what you got and get the best out of it. Now, one of the lessons that I have learned in recent years, I suppose, and recently, is you do have to take action. You've got to do the hard things, and sometimes people can be difficult, and you can do all you can, but it's not going to work. So if that's the case, and you run out of ideas, and you're genuinely convinced of that, then you have to change the team, or have to change individuals. And that's not an easy process. That always weighs heavily if you're a compassionate leader, I guess. So I'd qualify that, yes, you've got to work out how to get the best of your team, because you'll never get your dream team. But then you've got to also know, all right, when it is to take harder action.
Yeah, and you just used the word compassion. Do you think that's a key part of being an effective leader? You've got to be compassionate?
I've been a mindfulness practitioner for some years, for a long time, and there's an organisation that's called the Potential Project, and they one of their publications is the Mind of a Leader. So in that, they're talking about mindful leadership, and the difference, one aspect of that is the difference between empathy and compassion. And compassion, absolutely, you need as a leader. I think you need to understand, have the capacity to understand where people have come from, what journey they might have been on to get where they are, or to be in the circumstance they are, or to present the way they are. You can understand that and be sensitive to it and have compassion for it. But as a leader, the danger is, and I think a lot of people make this mistake, is having too much empathy, where they actually take on and get involved with those stories. And in our space, sometimes they can be very tragic stories.
Absolutely,
So it's not easy, but compassion, absolutely, and particularly in this sector, you need to have compassion, but you need to be able to act and make decisions which you don't know if they're the right ones. Sometimes they're hard decisions to make. They will often weigh heavily on you, but you've still got to be able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for that. So we're just talking about leadership. What are the key qualities that you try and bring into your role as the CEO of Havelock House every day? And is there anything there of when you look in the mirror, you say, there's the things I've got to work on. Is there anything there that you're working on at the present time that you're able to share?
You after me to reveal my weaknesses. Out in public.
Oh, no, areas for improvement, I'd like to call them.
Yeah, fair enough. Look, I think the things that the strengths that I bring, I tend to have a very analytical approach. I like to understand things deeply. I don't always want to get involved, but I like to understand it and really know how things work, whether it's organizations. I've always had a passion about organizations, what makes them tick, what makes them fail, when we were talking about culture before, what's the importance of culture and how is that relevant to what the organization's strategy or operating model is. So I think that's one of my strengths. I really like to know, pull things apart and understand them deeply. Things that I need to work on. Look, and following on from the conversation we just had about compassion, I have enormous respect for those people who work on the front lines in the community sector and deal one-on-one with people in very difficult circumstances, sometimes difficult people in stressful circumstances. I couldn't do that. I have enormous respect for those people. I couldn't do that. In some ways I think, well, that would have been a good grounding, I suppose, to help me understand what my role here is.
Yeah.
But I can get that through talking to people and eliciting stories. So getting people to tell their story or a story about their work. And I've used that quite a few times over the years, and particularly in board meetings. When you're often, as a board member, you're a little bit disconnected from the organisation. So many years ago, as a chair of the board of a disability advocacy organisation, I felt that we were often talking about governance and financial accountability, and it was all very dry, I suppose. But what the real purpose for us being there was to help people who were struggling with the system in some way and needed our help.
Yeah. So
I thought, okay, every board meeting, I got the executive officer to tell a story about something that had happened, about a client, and why they needed, what the circumstances were, and how the organisation helped them through that process. And it was a really powerful way to ground the board in what they were there to do. The next thing we might have been talking about was the financial accounts. But really, it was about people. And I think doing that in a day-to-day sense. So our staff meetings here, we get people to tell stories about things they've been dealing with at work or a particular situation. And that narrative, that storytelling can be very powerful and can be very grounding.
Yeah. Andrew, is there a story that you're happy to share, willing to share, can share on that? Something that comes to mind from discussions you had with your team, either at Havelock House or back in the Disability Services Day? Just a story that kind of highlights just the value proposition organisation like yours to deliver. I like to walk around Havelock House, and my office is here in Havelock House, and I bring my dog to work every day, so I use him as an excuse to walk around the building, and he sniffs all the smells and says hello to everyone. But that also gets me out and gives me contact with the residents, the people who live here. Mm-hmm. So I've got to know a few of them quite well, I think. Yeah. And some of them come and hunt us both out. Some of them just hunt my dog out. Say hello. And that has, so I've built a relationship over a few, I suppose. Mm. And one in particular, I guess, let me go back. Many of the people who find themselves in our sort of accommodation, that congregate living, really are impoverished in lots of ways, often have a history of mental illness or mental health challenges, possibly some addiction, generational disadvantage. And talking to people and finding out generally over time about their stories, find that they're trapped. So this one particular fellow has a mental health issue. He knows that.
and has some addiction issues, but he struggles to get help through the system to help him address those, and he's still expected to go and find a job. So he described it one day as his mental illness is he's not ill enough to get the disability pension, but he's too ill to be able to hold down or get a job.
Yeah,
and
challenging.
I thought that's, in various ways, that's the case for many people here, that the system just falling between the cracks, or there's just not quite enough help to support them. They don't have the support networks or the families. And that just made it clearer to me the importance of taking what I've been a big advocate since I started in this sector, which is the housing first or common ground approach. So we need to get someone a stable, secure, safe home, and then just let them get their own lives back on track. There's nothing you can do if you don't know where you're going to live, or you're stressing about being thrown in the streets, or we need a roof over our heads. And then people largely will find their own path back to stability and a connected life.
Yeah, and you said you've got 101 residences, people in residence at the moment. So we talk about organisational culture and operating cultures and effectiveness and efficiency, etc. Do you find that there's a culture among the residents at Havelock House? Is there a unwritten rule or a kind of a group kind of culture formed through their association with one another?
Definitely is. I'm not sure I could describe it, but there certainly is. And I think that there's a stronger sense of community that we often don't see, because people who have lived lives, incredibly tough lives often, while they are, their lives are often in conflict with each other, but there's all this bonding around adversity and hardship which occurs. And sometimes I can see that here, that common thread of struggle and adversity does have a bonding effect on some of our residents.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to see. But look, I can't say that I am close enough to describe it in much more detail.
No. Yeah, but I could just imagine, and especially at this time that we find ourselves in, you know, it's probably a benefit in a way that they can be sharing this experience with a probably larger group than some of us are able to, just within our families, for instance. You know, it's a kind of a different conversation I'd appreciate. But
and one of the things that when I came into this role, Havelock Housing was purely a property manager and tenancy manager. I believe, and I said right from the interview for this job, that it is absolutely essential to be a responsible and quality community housing provider. We have to think about community. We have to have we have to make an effort to reconnect people with their own community here, and then re-establish those links with the broader communities. So we started, I employed a community development manager, and I was really happy to see how quickly the resident community started to come out and join together around the ping pong table or the Yahtzee board. And really simple stuff. And having a morning tea and having some functions, and just trying to, a lot of them were a little bit, well, why would I do that? Or why would I come down and tell you? But when we put it on, they would come down, and all of a sudden it normalizes that social contact.
Yeah.
Starts to create bonds that perhaps weren't there or were being resisted. So that was pretty rewarding.
Yeah, and it must be a great experience for the residents there to have that kind of sense of community within that space. So I could imagine that'd work really well. And I suppose if we go to the longer term for Havelock House, do you see a significant strategic change from where you are now, or have you got hopes and dreams and ambitions for the organisation in the short to medium term?
Absolutely, some hopes and dreams, ambitions.
Yeah.
Havelock is in a reasonably good position to think about how to invest in bringing more properties, more homes
Yeah.
We have some challenges with the ACT government and some inhibitors, some policy inhibitors for us to be able to do that. One of those is the state of the property market in Canberra. Property is incredibly expensive, and the level of housing stress is very high. Rental affordability is the second worst in the country. So there's no shortage of challenges, and land price is very high. Getting access to land that we can develop in a way that's going to be financially sustainable is at the moment almost impossible. And my colleagues in the sector all have the same experience. So we absolutely are focused on expanding our portfolio, bringing more properties online. There's no shortage of demand, sadly, for our services and for our homes. So that's the challenge for the future. How and what that looks like is something I'm struggling with at the moment, and how to do it within the current policy environments and with some of the other challenges the government throws our way. Don't have an answer, but we're certainly trying hard.
Hey, just a shameless plug too, Andrew. One of the things I've learned being 6 or 7 months in the sector in this role is that you have a community of organisations and people who are willing to really collaborate. There's no, I don't get a sense there's a feeling of competition necessarily. There's a real focus on collaboration. I'm just thinking of some conversations I've had over in WA pre-lockdown around some of the work that's been done in the congruent living space. Some really interesting concepts around bringing tenants in to sit on committees and things like that to keep developing the organisations or the environment that they're in. So if you need to connect with like-minded people who are probably struggling or solving some of the problems that you might need some time on, there's certainly people in this sector willing to help, mate. So we're happy to put you in connection.
That's one of the things I've found in this role, that there is a lot of collaboration, or a lot of willingness to collaborate. So my colleagues in the sector, we don't really want to compete with each other. So we talk a lot. We've worked together. When the COVID crisis started, I convened a working group with my industry colleagues to share ideas, to share experiences, and collaborate in asking the government for what we needed. And everyone was very open, very willing. And I've certainly reached out a lot for advice since I started in this role. And everyone is very supportive, which has been good.
Yeah, it makes the life of the CEO a little bit easier. Yes.
And one of the challenges for me, which is a bit unique, Havelock House was built in 1951 as a boarding house for public servants at the time. So it's an old building, and it is heritage listed, but we're right near the middle of the city, and we're right on the main road. And most of your listeners probably know, or could probably guess, how much the land value and how much the developers would love to get a hold of this block. But the building is aging and it needs renewal in some way. So trying to work out and negotiate the future and secure it for social housing, which is what I absolutely want to do. There's not enough of this, homes for the cohort of people who come to Havelock in Canberra. There's certainly a shortage, so we want to keep it that way. But trying to work out what that needs to look like and who's going to pay for it and how it's going to happen and how we're going to manage the process is certainly a pretty big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just on another tangent, you say if you're in the business of expanding Havelock into the future, which it sounds like you might have to do if you can, when you go out to market looking for people, looking for new staff members, is there are there qualities that you look for in future employees? Is there things that stand out or is common across new employees?
Over the years, I've probably developed a reasonably unique way of recruiting, or at least interviewing people. So what I look for are attitude, enthusiasm, and an alignment of values with the organisation and the team. If they're there, nearly everything else can be developed and nurtured. So demonstrated skills and capability, to some extent, they're important in any role. Someone's got to have the technical skills to fulfill a role. But education experience is probably a distant third in my view of their utility to indicate whether someone's going to perform well in a role. So it's all about attitude, enthusiasm, and values alignment, I think.
Yeah, and how does one express that first meeting Andrew Rowe for the first time, important job, meeting the CEO? What are you looking for in that first meeting?
I look for someone who is comfortable, is genuine. When they talk, they can talk about what they've done, or they can tell a story about things. They clearly think about their role, what they've done in the past, what they'll do in this one. So generally, right, even before an interview starts, just having a general chat. This interview's already started, and generally people don't realise. Seeing how they communicate, how they relate to others, watching how they interact with people on the way in, how genuine they are, their integrity with the things they say throughout the conversation. They're all indicators. Look, this is not to say I haven't got it wrong. I've got it terribly wrong a few times. But that's what I think is most important. And that, they've really got to be genuine. We recruited, I mentioned earlier, for a community development manager.
Yeah.
One of the people we interviewed had worked as a crisis accommodation in Canberra, but that person hadn't really done any community development at all. They just needed, their contract was coming to an end, needed another job. Really terrible in relation to the actual role we were after, but she struck us by her genuineness and her openness and her obvious commitment and passion to everything she did. So she didn't get that role, but we certainly kept her in mind and kept in touch. And then about 4 months down the track, we found a role that did suit, and she's a really brilliant, enthusiastic, committed part of the team now. So it was that idea that she wasn't really suited to that, but we could see that she had those values that so in.
And when you say genuine, is that just from your position as a leader, it kind of accentuates the fact that you can trust your people because you know where they're coming from, and if they need to push back or have a different alternative view, you're going to receive it. Is that kind of where you come from?
Absolutely. So they're genuine to the principles, their principles, and those of the organisation, and that they have a commitment to those values, and that means standing up for them, or pointing out, or doing something when something's not right, and having that the courage, I guess. So whether it's lots of people do it when it's easy, but when power differential or other factors come into play, a lot of people will keep quiet and don't do anything. I don't want that. I want people who have the courage to stand up and contribute. And fight when they need to fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And stand up for what's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I'm just going to come back on screen now, Andrew, because I've just got probably one. Now, I had some other questions on there. I'm just noting the time. We're kind of close to 2 o'clock, and I know you've got commitments with your daughter this afternoon, which I understand. So what I thought I'd do is just ask maybe one last question. And if you've got a question of me, happy to answer anything in regards to the Institute or what we do or whatever that might be. Happy to do that. But I just thought one of our real challenges is to attract new talent into the sector more broadly. So I just want to ask a question around what, if you're a person looking to come into the sector, why would you encourage people to do that? So I'll ask a question around that. That's good. Andrew, thank you. One of the observations we make as a sector is it may not be people's first choice. Coming out of university or school may not be people's first choice to come and work in the housing sector. if there's someone out there today listening to this interview and they're thinking about getting into housing, social housing or the like, what advice would you give them?
I would encourage them and advise that it is incredibly rewarding when you see the impact of what we do. So I would encourage them not to let go of that passion or that interest. What advice? I would encourage people to be resilient and to throw themselves into a role and think about the purpose of what they do, not about where they're going in their career, not about what's next or themselves performing well. Just think about what it is they're doing for our clients or stakeholders and focus on that. I think when people get too focused on a career, where to go to next, it saps some of the energy and quality away from having an impact. So I think it comes back to that idea of genuineness and integrity. If you've got a passion, all you care about is delivering that or doing that, rather than thinking about where you go to next. And look, the other things which skills acquisition, experience, that sort of stuff, it's going to come. It will come inevitably. So I think just making sure that you focus on the right thing and focus on the service you provide and the impact you have on people and others in your role, rather than what you do and where you're going to go.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on when you talk about impact, because we are probably one of maybe only a handful of sectors where you're really having a transformative, positive life impact on people who are really struggling, and it's kind of nice, right?
And I think the other piece of advice would be, I try and find an organisation and leaders within the organisation who are also genuine and show integrity and will give you an opportunity and help you take a risk and support you in taking those risks as you develop your career. So they've got I told the story about my former managing director. So you've got to have someone there who have your back, and who, if you jump in the deep end and swim hard, they're gonna be with you all the way. And they'll throw you in the deep end occasionally to see how you go, but they'll be there right with you to help you out if you need it. So if you've got that and you're in an organisation where that sort of stretching and that testing of people and that support is there, then I think that's what's really going to make you an effective leader and lead to a very rewarding career.
Yeah, and as you said earlier a couple of times, culture is just incredibly, incredibly important to enjoying your job.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to feel satisfaction out of or feel a cultural positivity out of zeros and decimal points in your bank account on payday. So can work for a little bit, but not often. So it's really important. Andrew, any final words, any last thoughts from you as we wrap up today's AHI Industry Connect interview from yourself?
Look, I spent a long time in the private sector, as you probably gathered, and I always wanted the next phase of my career to be in the NFP sector. Yeah. And 5 or 6 years ago, I had the opportunity to join Common Ground Canberra board, and that's when I first got some exposure to social housing, community housing, and it really resonated. So I've been enormously fortunate to get this role. I love this role. We have a great impact, and we have an interesting journey. We can increase our impact. It's really challenging and really rewarding. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm learning lots from people who've been in the industry for decades. Yep. But anyone who is interested, just throw yourselves in it. It's worth
Absolutely. And I'll just reinforce the point made earlier to Andrew. Again, the AHI role is to really connect the network together and get people learning off each other, organisations learning off each other as well. One of the interesting things that we've recently launched, and again, this is a shameless marketing plug for AHI, but that's my job, right? We've just launched our 2020 mentoring program, and it's due to COVID and due to kind of modern availability of resources. That's a fully virtualised mentoring program. I think we've got 14 or 15 mentee-mentor relationships happening at the moment. They're starting to come together, which is great. And we've got a mentee in WA with a mentor in New Zealand. So we've now moved to a really Australasian type model. One of the things too might be also beneficial, even though you're kind of in the middle of your career, we really think there's an opportunity for mentees to be getting mentored by people who've been in the housing industry for a long time. It could even be someone who's same age, maybe even younger, who's been in the sector a long time, who could share their story with you as well. So that's just something that might help you in your career as you gain more insight into the housing sector, and maybe let's hope that you stay in it for the rest of your career. That's our goal as well. So I'm going to lock you in.
Happy to do that.
Keep an eye out for that. There'll be more news on the mentoring front as we go along. So Andrew, I just want to say thank you again on your busy Friday to come and share your story and come and share your insight. I know that our Industry Connect interviews are having a real impact on people in our sector. And it's real and it's raw, and we're learning lots from you. So I want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, you have a good rest of your Friday. Is there mountain biking on the plans for the weekend?
I'm hoping so. I think Canberra weather will suit it, and so I have to get out on Sunday.
Yeah, lovely. Well, you enjoy yourself, mate. Stay safe, and we look forward to hearing more from you and Havelock House in the future.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Cheers, mate.
Right, bye.